Several years ago, we began attending a monthly folk music concert in Darlington, which is called Deer Creek Coffee House. There, we learned of musicians that led tours in Ireland. We said that when we retire, that we would like to join one of those tours, especially because a focus of the tour would be to go to a pub every night and listen to traditional Irish music. That really appealed to me. Last year, we learned of an opportunity to attend one of these tours, which was to be led by Tommy O'Sullivan, who is a native of Dingle, Ireland, and his wife, Sandra. We inquired about it and paid our deposit and set our sights on a trip to Ireland. On Friday, September 15th, 2023, Debbie and I drove to the Aberdeen train station and rode the Amtrak train to the Newark, New Jersey Liberty International Airport. From there, we flew from Newark to Dublin, Ireland, and arrived at around 8 a.m. the next morning. We hoped to spend the day out in Dublin, but went to our hotel first and found that a room was already available. Therefore, we took our bags to the room and made our way out to the nearby bus stop and rode the bus to downtown Dublin. We had purchased in advance a Leap card for each of us to allow for unlimited riding of the city buses for 3 days. We had already planned some things to do in Dublin for the 2 days that we would be there before the tour would start on Monday morning. We crossed over the River Levy on the Haypenny Bridge and took pictures there, since that is a historic site. The name means halfpenny, which was the original cost to cross the bridge. Then we found our way to Christ Church, which is now a museum, and the St. Michael's Tower. We paid an entrance fee because there is also a museum there about the history of Dublin. The museum was excellent, and we really enjoyed climbing up in the tower that day. Then, when we got over to the church, we were able to put on audio headphones and listen to a self-guided audio tour of the cathedral itself. Other things that I wanted to do that day was walk down Grafton Street, which is more like a shopping mall, and enter a park called St. Stephen's Green. Then we had dinner in a pub that was also a restaurant. It was called the Hairy Lemon. There we had our first experience of Irish stew and the wonderful dark brown bread that you're served in most places in Ireland. With lots of butter on it, the bread was delicious. We also walked around an area called Temple Bar. It was named after a man named Temple who built a wall or bar there along the river to prevent flooding in his business establishments in that area. I had never seen so many pubs and bars in one area in my life, but it was quite enchanting to walk on cobblestone streets and alleys and to see the architecture and everything that was about this Irish tourism area. It rained most of the day. On the second day in Dublin, we had planned to go on a guided walking tour around the city. We learned about the Easter Rising and some history around the Irish attempts for independence from English rule. We also planned to visit a little diner, if you want to call it that, near St. Patrick's Cathedral. There we had a light lunch and then walked over to St. Patrick's for the 3:15 p.m. evensong service. It was much like a mass without the Eucharist. A lot of beautiful pipe organ music and the choir singing many songs. The priest also delivered a message. It was a beautiful experience to be in this historic cathedral, to hear the music and to experience sitting in the enclosed pews and to look around at the beauty of this amazing building. That evening we took a long walk north of the river to a pub called Cobblestone. It is known for its traditional Irish music. When we arrived, it was still early in the evening, but many people were in the pub and there was one stool available at the bar. So I had Debbie sit at the stool, and the couple next to us said that they were leaving in 5 minutes, which would give us another stool to sit on. The musicians were already playing, and while we were there, they switched musicians. But the entire time there was a guitar player, two fiddle players, and a flute. And a lady even got up and did some clogging right there in the pub. It was a wonderful time and our first experience of a true Irish session at a pub. It rained all day. The next morning, which was Monday, we boarded the bus with 27 other people in our group and left Dublin to begin our adventure. The first stop was Malahide Castle. This castle was owned by a family for hundreds of years. They were practicing Catholics, and during the time when the English outlawed Catholicism, they had to hide the priest when he came to perform services. We were shown that there was a trap door that he would go through to hide and then leave the castle so that he would not be detected by the English authorities. Another thing in that room that really touched me was a baptismal font. It was made of wood, very ornate, and it looked like you could set a bowl of water on top of it for use for sprinkling water on a baby or whoever was being christened or baptized. The castle had lovely gardens, and we enjoyed walking through those as well. There were several greenhouses also. After leaving Malahide Castle, we rode the bus for quite a while. We passed many green paddocks of sheep. These small pastures were mostly surrounded by hedges. I wondered how they went about trimming those hedges so nicely. We then arrived at the top of a hill which overlooked a beautiful area of Mill River and green pasture land. At the top of this hill was a round stone fort which is called Grianan of Alich. The main structure is a stone ring fort, thought to have been built in the 6th or 7th century. It has been identified as the seat of the Kingdom of Alich and one of the royal sites of Gaelic Ireland. The walls are about 15 feet thick and 16 feet high. Inside it has 3 terraces, which are linked by steps and 2 long passages within. Originally, there would have been buildings inside the ring fort. It was a spectacular sight to see. Although the sun came out while we were there, it started raining on our walk back to the bus. For the next 2 nights, we stayed at the Inishowen Gateway Hotel in Buncrana. Connected to the hotel was a gym and swimming pool. People swam laps in the 20-meter pool. Therefore, I got up early the next morning and swam laps, and did so for 2 days in a row. It was wonderful to be swimming again. I learned that in all the swimming pools in Ireland, everyone must wear a swim cap, which I purchased at the front desk of the gym for €3.50. I have kept the cap as a souvenir and plan to wear it when I swim back in the States. On Tuesday morning, we loaded back on the bus and began our first day of touring in the most northerly areas of Ireland. We rode the bus to what's called the Doe Famine Village. It was a small historic village that has been made into a museum, and it's where they tell the story of what the Irish people experienced there during the potato famines in the early 1800s. We were deeply moved by what we saw and learned about the potato famines, and became an opportunity for the English, or Protestants as they say, to commit genocide by not providing any relief aid or food to the Irish people during the famine. Therefore, they starved out many villages of Irish during that time. Our final stop on that day was a place called Malin Head. I think it's the most northerly point in Ireland. It was raining all day, but we gladly got out of the bus and walked around this cliff area where there is a lookout tower from days gone by where they could watch for enemy ships coming. I wanted to walk down as close as I could get to the water and the crashing waves. I followed sheep trails down along a fence and to some stony outcrops. Although it was raining the whole time that we were there, it was magnificent to watch the waves crashing against the rocks at the foot of the cliffs. I even enjoyed seeing some colorful moss growing on the stones. A farmer had built a modern wire fence down in that area to contain his sheep. It rained all day. We had some time on our own while in Buncrana, and since we loved to walk, we ventured through the small town and ended up along the shore area. There was a paved walkway along the river that commemorated the man who wrote Amazing Grace. His story is for another day, but we ventured down to the beach area and walked to the other end, which was very near to our hotel. I enjoyed the beach walk. Debbie and I had dinner on our own at a small Italian sub shop, and then we walked to the Drift Inn, which is where everyone was planning to gather for some traditional Irish music that evening. A family and some friends were playing music at the pub. The wife played the fiddle, the husband played the accordion, and their children played penny whistles, recorders, and the Irish drum. They were excellent at their craft, and it was a lovely evening sitting there in the pub, sipping on our sparkling waters and watching and listening to the music. It rained while we walked back to the hotel. Wednesday was the day for us to experience Northern Ireland. There was no border crossing into the country. We arrived in the river city Derry. It started to rain. A guide took us on a walking tour around and on the walls of the ancient city of Derry. The English call it Londonderry, but the Irish, with some indignation, will correct you and say that it's Derry. Derry's walls were originally built by the Irish Society between 1613 and 1619 under the supervision of the London builder and architect Peter Benson. They were built with the intention of protecting the Scottish and English planters that had moved to Ulster as part of the plantation of Ulster that had been established by James I. It was a direct consequence of the previous settlement being destroyed by Irish chieftain Cahir O'Doherty during O'Doherty's rebellion. As a result of the building of the city's defenses by the Irish Society, which was a consortium of livery companies based out of the city of London, and the city was officially renamed Londonderry in the 1613 Royal Charter. This is what has subsequently led to the naming dispute for the city and county of Derry. We then left the ancient walls and walked along a street where murals were painted on the sides of buildings. This was an area of past riots and fighting in the streets where the Irish wanted to end English control and subjugation of the Irish people. Today there is equality in elections and employment, but the Irish still have deep-seated feelings of animosity toward English rule in this area. I was deeply moved by the feelings of injustice and misunderstandings that have occurred for the Irish people. To visit a part of Ireland that was taken over and controlled by the English and is still under English governance today created in me feelings of sadness and even bitterness. As one friend said to me, Irish history was torturous, but their faith, music, and dance gave them joy. The drink gave them conviviality. The next part of that day's tour was the Bushmill Distillery. I found it to be boring, not much to see, and a lot of boring talk about how whiskey is made. One of the highlights of the bus tour for me was visiting Giant's Causeway. It's a scenic area along the northern shores of Ireland. Legend has it that an Irish giant named Finn McCool created a causeway to get across the Irish Sea to face his rival, the Scottish giant Benandonner. Following their fearsome meeting, Benandonner ripped up the causeway as he fled back to Scotland, leaving what you see here today. The most characteristic and unique feature of the site is the exposure of some 40,000 large, regularly shaped polygonal columns of basalt in perfect horizontal sections, forming a pavement. This dramatic sight has inspired legends about giants striding over the sea to Scotland. Of course, it was raining while we were there. Debbie and I took the bus shuttle down to the bottom of the cliffs, and then we walked along a trail with many other tourists that follows along the shoreline. The cliff-like area that was covered in vegetation was breathtaking to look up at. I wanted to climb a higher trail, but Debbie was nervous about that, especially since it was raining and it might be slippery on the trail. So we parted ways. She walked back to the shuttle bus, and I climbed the steps and trail that leads to the top of the cliff. The views were spectacular, and as I reached the top, the sunshine started peeking out. I had spectacular views across the shoreline area of the Giant's Causeway, and also views of pasture land and sheep and the surrounding countryside. While walking that trail at the top of the cliff with the sun coming through the clouds, I felt fresh and alive and renewed. That evening we attended an informal music session at O'Flaherty's Bar. While there, a young man and young woman came out to the middle of the floor and danced some Irish dances for us. It was fun to watch. After spending our last night in Buncrana, we toured Fanad Lighthouse. At 22 meters high, standing along a cliff, the lighthouse has a distant view across the North Atlantic Ocean. I was very interested in the lighthouse, since I volunteer at the Concord Point Lighthouse in Havre de Grace, Maryland. It was a thrill to climb up the stairs to the top of the lighthouse and learn how it was operated and its history. It rained the whole time that we visited the lighthouse. After visiting the lighthouse, we took a long bus ride on our way to Donegal town. We stopped at a place called Glenveigh National Park. It's the site of a castle. A wealthy land speculator from County Laos named John George Adair initially purchased several small holdings between 1857 and 1859, eventually establishing the estate of Glenveigh. But Adair would later incur infamy in Donegal and Ireland as a most hated landlord when he ruthlessly evicted 244 tenants from their homes and the Derryveigh evictions. Legend has it that one woman with 6 children ended up putting a curse on the castle so that anyone who owned it would never have children. The curse is believed to have come true, as some owners never did. After Adair married his American-born wife, Cornelia, he started constructing the Glenveigh Castle. It was his dream to create a hunting estate in the highlands of Donegal, but tragedy would strike and he suddenly passed away in 1885. After his passing, Cornelia took over, introducing deer stalking in the estate and continually making improvements to the castle, including laying out the gardens. After Cornelia's passing in 1921, Glenveigh Castle fell into decay until its next owner, Professor Arthur Kingsley Porter of Harvard University, in 1929. He initially came to Ireland to study Irish culture and archaeology. However, in 1933, he mysteriously disappeared. In 1937, Mr. Henry McElhaney of Philadelphia bought the estate, an Irish American whose father grew up a few miles north of Glenveigh. Mr. McElhaney devoted a lot of time improving the gardens and restoring Glenveigh National Park Castle in 1975. Mr. McElhaney sold the estate to the Office of Public Works, which allowed the creation of Glenveigh National Park, which in 1983 was bestowed to the nation of Ireland. We enjoyed walking around the grounds, looking at the exterior of the castle, which is situated right along the lake, and exploring the beautiful gardens that supposedly Cornelia had started. The rain stopped while we were touring the castle grounds. On Friday, we walked to the Donegal Castle, which was just a block or two from our hotel. The castle was interesting, as all of these ancient buildings are. One feature that I found interesting was in the spiral staircase. There was a doorway that went into a small room. They called it the guardrobe. This is where they would go to use the restroom. They actually would sit over holes that allowed their body waste to go into a pit, which I believe was outside. This was a feature of the ancient castles that always fascinated me. But what was more interesting was when the tour guide told us that the enemy would wait under the toilet stalls and then shoot an arrow up through the hole, which would probably be fatal for the person sitting on the toilet. Ouch. Another thing about this particular castle tour that really stood out to me was the tour guide's explanation of the history of Ireland. She really drove home the fact that the English came and took Ireland away from the Irish people, and for hundreds of years the Irish lived under the rule of the English. The cruelty to the peasants was very sad, and I remember shedding tears as the tour guide told us some stories. After the castle tour, we boarded the bus and rode to a coastal area called Slieve League. This was probably the only day that we experienced sunshine and no rain. At Slieve League, we boarded a shuttle bus that took us to a high point on the cliffs. From this viewing point, we could see the beautiful cliffs along the Atlantic coast, and we even saw in the distance waterfalls coming down the very steep rocky areas into the ocean. Because the sun came out, it was really a beautiful sight to see this area. Next, we rode the bus to a town called Ardara. Here we went to Eddie Doherty's weaving shop. Eddie was probably in his 80s and still weaving beautiful cloth from wool yarn. His son also knows how to run the business, but has chosen not to continue in the family weaving trade, but operates a pub across the street. When Eddie can no longer weave the yarn, the hand-weaving trade may be lost forever in this area. I thoroughly enjoyed watching him weaving on his loom and seeing the beautiful patterns that evolved from the different colors of yarn being woven together. Debbie bought a hat there. We were coming back to Ardara later in the day, but first we were going back to our hotel in Westport. We had a group dinner together at La Bella Donna Italian restaurant. Others in the group raved about how good the food was, but I did not particularly enjoy my meal, and I wasn't too happy about eating Italian food while in Ireland. After dinner, we headed back to Ardara on the bus for a special concert that our tour guides had purchased tickets for the group. This concert was part of the Johnny Doherty Festival 2023, and it was held at the Beehive Bar in Ardara. There were 3 musicians who played there: Brid Harper on the fiddle, Dermot Byrne on the accordion, and Steve Cooney on the guitar. They were top-notch musicians. The blending of their sounds was music to my soul, and I would say this was definitely the musical highlight of the entire trip. Day 6 of the bus tour took us first to Glencar Waterfall, which was lovely to walk up to and around the hill where the waterfall lies. Even though it was overcast, there was no rain while we were there. When the bus took us not far to an area called Drumcliff and to an old church where the poet William Yeats was buried. I enjoyed looking at the church and walking through the graveyard and seeing Yeats' grave. The afternoon bus ride took us to Carrowmore Megalith Complex. County Sligo is home to the largest and oldest collection of megalithic stone circles and dolmens found in Ireland. A dolmen or portal tomb is a type of single-chamber megalithic tomb, usually consisting of two or more upright megaliths supporting a large flat horizontal capstone or table. The monuments, an early form of passage grave, are located at Carrowmore, a townland within an extensive landscape of prehistoric burial and ceremonial monuments. This did not interest me too much, but there was a tour guide who took us out in the fields, and it rained while we were out there. I'm thankful for the rain poncho that I had to use, and he explained to us that it's believed that ancient peoples were buried at these sites where there were some stones stuck out of the ground. Once we were back at the hotel, the group had a pizza party. I wasn't looking forward to eating pizza in Ireland, but the dinner was very nice. We got to choose an appetizer and what type of pizza we wanted and a dessert. The real highlight of the day was walking over to Matt Molloy's pub. Matt Molloy was the flute player in the famous Irish musical group, the Chieftains. We arrived at the pub an hour early. We found ourselves in a small room with a fire in the fireplace. The only place for us to sit was right near the fire, which was already very warm. We waited until the music started. As people gathered in, there were a couple of musicians that played guitar and banjo. After a bit, Matt Molloy came in and joined them by playing the flute. The music was enchanting, and I felt like I was experiencing the authenticity of an Irish pub with traditional music. Day 7 of the tour was a Sunday, and Debbie and I had planned to attend church there in Westport. Because I really want to experience what the locals experience, I wanted to attend the Church of Ireland. The Holy Trinity Church wasn't far from our hotel. Therefore, we walked there for the Sunday Mass. Later, we found out that the organist was away for 2 weeks. Consequently, the music during the service and the prelude music was all pre-recorded classical music. I was disappointed to not hear organ music during the service. But after the Mass, we were invited to join the congregation for cookies and coffee in the rear of the chapel. We found the people to be friendly, welcoming, and delightful. On this day, the tour group had no planned activities, so Debbie and I planned a long walk down to the waterfront, an area called The Point. May I add that it was raining the entire time that we walked down and back. It was maybe 3 kilometers each way. Fortunately, there were sidewalks for us to walk on most of the way, but as we got down to the waterfront, there were no sidewalks, and we navigated near the boats that were tied up there at the wharf, and we also walked through some parking lots just to stay out of the constant flow of automobile traffic coming in and out of the point. I remember reading that people would swim at the point, but I assumed that this was only in the summertime during the warm months of the year. However, when we arrived, we noticed that there were people swimming in the water. We had brought some leftover food with us to eat for our lunch, and we sat down at picnic tables right there by the water. People were in swimsuits, walking past us, going down some steep steps into the chilly water. They didn't stay in the water for long, and then they climbed the stairs back up, walked past us, and entered into a little trailer on the back of a pickup truck. We were very curious as to what they were doing and learned that the trailer was a sauna. The bathers paid 10 euros to use the sauna for the day. The swimmers would walk back and forth from sauna to water and to the sauna again. What added to my amusement of this scene was that it was raining the entire time. Here we are in raincoats and ponchos, sitting on a bench eating our leftovers while the raindrops are coming down, and folks in swim trunks and bathing suits are going back and forth past us, going to the water and out of the water. It was almost comical, but I envied them and wished I had my swimsuit and €10 and that I could do the same thing that they were doing. The next day we left Westport to travel to our last hotel, which was in Galway. But along the way we detoured and viewed some interesting and emotionally moving places. We first drove through Doolue Pass. The Doolue Valley is pretty much in the middle of nowhere in County Mayo. A large lake is situated in the middle of the valley. Our bus pulled up to the memorial along the side of the road. We filed out and looked with wonder. At this location in 1849, 400 Irish peasants died from exposure to the cold and starvation. They had been summoned to Louisburg to find relief and food at the Delphi hunting lodge. Unfortunately, they were refused any help, and on returning home, they camped in Doolue Pass, and 400 people died. Being in this place of deep suffering filled me with sorrow. I wept. How can man be so unkind to a suffering stranger? It is believed that much of the death that occurred during the potato famines was the result of selfishness of landlords who would rather ship their goods overseas to receive a handsome payment rather than to supply the needs of starving peasants. Some consider it to be purposeful genocide. Our trip continued to the valley of Connemara. We stopped for a photo opportunity at the Aslay Falls, where the salmon swim upriver to spawn. Then we stopped for a group lunch in a small inn called Hamilton's. The hamlet had no more than 10 buildings, and it was situated on an inlet called Killary Harbor. I had a beef stew at Hamilton's. It was delicious, thick, and hearty. The bus ride continued until we arrived at Kylemore Abbey. As soon as we got off the bus, the rain started to pour down. The abbey has a long history, but it was originally a castle-type mansion built into the base of the mountain. It overlooks Lake Poulacapal. The name means place of the horse. Built in the early 1800s by an Englishman, the castle has eventually fallen into the hands of an order of Benedictine nuns. They have made the lower floor into a museum, while the upper floors are used for the nuns' residences and a school which they operate for girls. We enjoyed touring the castle. It is absolutely beautiful, and the setting there on the lake is breathtaking. That evening we arrived in Galway for our last 2 nights in Ireland. Debbie was very interested in seeing Galway because her son Wally attended college there for a semester. He had enjoyed his experience in Ireland, so we wanted to see this town where he had attended university classes and met people. It was recommended that we attend a traditional Irish music session at the Crane Pub. As usual, we knew that in order to secure a seat close to the musicians, we needed to arrive an hour early. The Crane is a 2-story pub. We climbed the back stairs to the upstairs part. The door was closed and nobody was there yet. That meant that we could get the seat of our choice. Around 8:30, the door was opened and we found a table by the wall where we could watch the crowd of people while listening to the music. Our informant told us that a piper would be playing this night. As people came in, the musicians were setting up. The piper played an instrument that kind of looked like bagpipes, but there was no mouthpiece to blow into. He had a bellows under his right arm to keep the instrument full of air. There were a couple of fiddle players and a guitar as well. The music was high speed and flowing on forever. Debbie wondered how anyone can distinguish between songs because she commented that all the music sounded the same to her. Some of our friends on the bus tour sat next to us at other tables. As the room filled up, a young man, college age, sat in a seat at our table. His college mate sat next to him. I engaged them in conversation about Galway and the university. They also were learning at the university about traditional Irish music and told us that the next night there would be a similar group playing Irish music, but it would be university students. However, when we showed up the next night for music, the place was already filled to capacity, and the doorman was not allowing anyone more to enter. We were disappointed by that. The last full day we had in Ireland was to enjoy a guided walking tour in Galway. The tour guide was dressed in a red costume that may have been traditional English attire a few hundred years ago. He was acting the part of a town crier. The tour was interesting as we saw some hidden gems in the city, including part of the old city wall, which is now incorporated into a shopping mall. The informational highlight of the tour was that I learned that Galway was settled by English who drove out all the Irish. Therefore, most of the surnames in Galway are of English descent. The Irish established new homes along the waterfront where they continued their livelihood of fishing and selling the dried fish. Our afternoon and evening was spent walking around town, exploring all the streets. I bought some local chocolate, which was disappointing to the taste. Then we bought ice cream from a shop that claimed that all the ingredients were locally sourced. The ice cream was excellent. We did visit a cheese shop and bought some amazingly delicious cheese. Since we could not attend the Irish music session put on by the university students, we went to a bar near our restaurant and hotel and listened to a man play guitar and sing. It was pop music from the 70s. There was space for Debbie and me to do some dancing. As we left the bar, we stopped to chat with the two security guys standing at the door. They were checking IDs of all the college students who wanted to enter the bar. Drinking age in Ireland, I think, is 18. The men were true blue Irish. It was interesting to talk with them about their jobs, employment in Ireland, and lifestyle. I always enjoyed listening to the locals' accents. The next day, the bus took us to the airport. It rained. My final thoughts about Ireland. Although it doesn't feel like an island when you are there, there is a sense that you are surrounded by water. Even though we did not explore the centre counties of Ireland, we felt that we had experienced the true flavor of what Ireland is like to live there and what the people are like as a culture. Their history is long, very long. They like to tell that their story goes back even before the Vikings arrived. But the essence of emotion that lies deep within the Irish people is the feeling of being defeated many times by the English invaders, being subjugated by them, and even hated by them. The troubles of Northern Ireland still persist in the hearts of the Irish people, even though most of the issues have been resolved. Equality for all Irish people is at the heart of those troubles, and I get the feeling that this desire has been met. The people's lives seem to revolve around the conviviality of drink. Pubs are everywhere, and in most of these establishments there will be live music. Music and dance remain as cultural standards in a modern society of westernization. I'm not sure that I long to go back to Ireland, although it is a beautiful country. I'm glad that I could experience it through the folk music tour that we took.